Good morning. We're going to go ahead and start. Can you hear me okay, Caesar? Okay. Good morning. I would first like to welcome and thank each of you for attending this morning's workshop to help the village, ourselves, and our neighbors build a stronger and more resilient community. We face the ever-increasing challenges of climate change and must adapt our thinking and our responses to be more prepared and self-reliant. The goal of today's workshop is to help you prepare better pre-storm and post-storm recovery. After the manager's presentation, we'll have an open dialogue on identifying critical issues and potential solutions. Without further ado, Manager Manners.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out today. And today we're just going to really go through a bit about what can be done to prepare for hurricanes, both from the residents' perspective, the village perspective, what we are doing, as well as we'll review Irma as well and look at lessons learned from that. And there'll be a chance for Q&A at the end of that as well. And now I'm letting the computer catch up with me. There we go. All right. But that's a short overview. I think there's a little overview here printed out on the chairs if you guys want to do that to follow along.
Right there on the bunch of chairs. And there's also handouts over here for those of you who came in later. Please help yourself to some handouts here as well.
Okay, so we're rapidly approaching the 2018 hurricane season, and you know, it's all about preparedness, what we can do in advance so that we are prepared. No two hurricanes are alike, so you know, everything that we did to prepare last year may or may not work this year, and so that's one of the things that we have to really be prepared for and look at different alternatives and see what we can do to continually improve our systems here in the village, as well as the residents and what you guys can do to prepare. It's all about being, you know, as proactive as possible, you know, at this point. Once the hurricane is hit, then we become reactive. That's where we really firefight and deal with whatever Mama Nature has thrown at us. And so it becomes, you know, a bit of a scramble at that point. We can make all the best plans in the world and have absolutely none of that be useful once the hurricane has hit. So at this point, we're doing all of our preparations. And now is really the time to start taking some action before the storm to prepare. Before the storm, one of the things that you can do now is contact FPL. If you have trees that are in power lines, contact FPL now. Ask them to come out and trim those trees. It's, you know, the week before the storm when we know it's going to hit, FPL is not going to be able to do that. And so that's something that we as the village and as residents can do to help get that moving forward now and be more prepared. Additionally, you know, if you have anything that's a projectile or potential projectile in your yard, you can clean those up, look for those. Just pay attention. I mean, we all have lawn furniture at our homes, and all of that can become airborne during a storm. So just be aware of that so that should a storm arise or be coming towards us, you can get that moved inside. And I realize that most of you guys have been through storms here before, so a lot of this is redundant for you. It's old news, but it's just a good to have a little refresher right now, I think, for all of us. I know certainly for me too. And then hurricane preparations, you know, you should really have 7 days worth of food and water and medicines, pet medicines, whatever you need for your pets, your family, all of that on hand when a storm arises. And we as the village have limited resources and limited staff. We will always help as much as we can, you know, after a storm. But we do need you to be a little self-sufficient as well, if possible, and have those preparations on hand. Additionally, you know, make sure your shutters are in good working order. Your generators, if you have a generator, is also in good working order. And then it's really, you know, determining your risk. You know, hurricanes bring many hazards, and we're fortunate that we're inland far enough that storm surge is not a huge factor for us. It does come up. It did come up in Irma, and that was one of the things that South Florida Water Management manages our canal, the C8 canal here. And so I'll talk more about that later on in the presentation. But we did get, some minor flooding, and we were fortunate on that. I think those of you who lived on Griffing on the canal, you saw the water come almost to your home, if not, I think it was probably in a few homes, but it was certainly up to it. So that's something that we can also prepare for. Know your evacuation zones, too. In the village, it's broken into 2 evacuation zones. Everything south of 119th Street is Zone C. Everything north of that is Zone D. The county determines when it's time to evacuate. And they let us know. You guys, by watching the TV, will probably get the information as fast, if not faster, than we do. In this modern age of technology, word travels very quickly on TV as well, and they often like to announce it on TV. So before we get the email or the text from the county, you may see it on TV as well. But be aware of your evacuation zone. This last hurricane during Irma, they did announce an evacuation. It was late in the game. I think most of us decided to weather it out here because we had already been seeing on TV how backed up all of the evacuation routes were. And so now's the time to start thinking about, should you have to evacuate, what route would you take? And look at other arteries besides the I-95 or the Turnpike, because we know those are going to be the most used, and those are probably going to be the ones where you get stuck in traffic.
I'd like to interject something on that, if I may.
Okay, sure.
During our governor's conference calls, one of the things that was interesting was there was a lot of conversation about whether or not they should open up the roadways and go one way. But then if they did that, they would cut off the supplies that were coming back in this direction. So they voted not to do that. So you can't assume that they're going to open up the roadways. It's very much a case-by-case basis depending on what their situation is. Also, just because you evacuate, and you'll talk, I'm sure, more about this, you don't have to evacuate very far. You can evacuate inland inside of another family member's home is not in an evacuation zone. A lot of the people that are on the beaches and so forth go inland. They don't go very far. So that's another alternative.
Okay, thank you. And so now really is the time to secure your property and your homes. Don't wait for the storm warning to be issued, please, because then it's really, it's a matter of scrambling at that point, and things get missed and overlooked. Clean your yard, remove the projectiles, as I've already said. Make sure you have protective coverings and hardware for all openings, and if possible, take steps to reinforce roof ties. And this presentation will be on the website, so you'll be able to click through all the links that we have in here. And so there's a lot of good information that's linked to different websites throughout this presentation. So after this, if you want to take your time and go through the presentation, click on these links. It'll give you a lot more information than what I'm top-lining here today. Complete a written plan if you can. We know that it always helps to have something in writing, simply because after a storm or immediately prior to a storm, we're scrambling and things get overlooked and missed, and it helps to have that checklist. And that's just something that we can each do for our own homes to help prepare. So really, where to begin on that? There's several different, There's several different forms and links here that you can use to create a plan. Also in this brochure, which we have several brochures down there, and pardon my cold, I apologize. There's a hurricane preparedness checklist on the back of this that's just a handy little reminder for us. And so there's always going to be something in there that we forget, and that's good to have. And prepare evacuation kits. Make sure that all your papers that you'll need, your insurance papers, your medicines, for every person in the family, as well as your pets, if you have pets, and I think most of us do here. And make sure all of that's ready to go. Should we reach the pardon me, the hurricane warning stage, or an evacuation order is starting to come through. Create and review your checklist, of course. Food and water are so important. It's something that we really take for granted. Historically, the county has brought in water for us after the storms. They did it Irma. Commissioner Sally Heyman was phenomenal about that. She called me at 8 o'clock one night and said, I've just got and meet us and pick it up. And, Caesar from Public Works was fantastic and left his home and went and did just that. So we had water to hand out to residents, and while we were under a boil water order at that point. And hopefully they'll supply ice. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but you need to, if ice is crucial to you, you need to find a source for that or have a generator so that you can have that prepared for you. And talk with your family members. I mean, we all know, as heads of households, we all sort of know what we would do in an emergency, but it helps to let the rest of the family know too. Talk it through with them. They may have some ideas that we didn't think of, and that way we're all on the same page as well. So there's so many surprises that come with a natural disaster that anything we can prepare for and any surprises we can eliminate by just having a quick conversations with our families is always beneficial.
I just want to make one other point, if I may. One of the things that goes very quickly, obviously, is gas and cash out of machines. Especially if you consider evacuation, you might want to consider how you would manage that piece early, because that does tend to be some of the first things that became very problematic, and in the governor's conference calls, those were highlighted as realistic problems for people, trying to get enough cash out fast enough. The other thing that was not mentioned as much, which I like that you mentioned here, is protect your electronic data. In this day and age, everything we have is electronic, and water and electronic does not mix. So consider how you would go about securing your hard drives and some of your records, either via possibly doing things like cloud. Some of you believe in cloud data storage, others of you do not. You can also have your own cloud data and get your own server to do that as well. But those are things to seriously consider in the case of this new day and age where everything is electronic.
And the mayor did bring up a good point, specifically about gas. We know that everyone runs to the gas station the minute there's any notice of an impending storm. And we see the lines there, that sort of thing. But a lot of people who were evacuating were also running out of gas because they were sitting on, the interstate or the turnpike for so long. So look at that as well. Make sure that before you get on one of these arteries out, that you have a full tank, if at all possible. And don't wait until you're down to that last eighth of a tank to start looking for a gas station as you are moving north.
And you also may consider, if you are going to evacuate, how far you have to go, how far your gas can take you in high traffic, and then compensate by that by carrying jerry cans, because that does become a real issue.
And really, it helps to develop multi-tiered plans. And by that, I mean, where to shelter. There's where to shelter, whether to shelter in place. That's great in one storm. It may not work in another. And so look at the different alternatives that are available to you. Do you have friends that are 10 miles inland that you can ride the storm out with, or do you need to hop in your car and go to Pensacola to miss the storm? And I had friends this year for Irma that did just that. They went all over the state trying to get away from the storm, and Irma pretty much covered the state. And so it was a bit of a challenge for them. So keep that in mind, though, that it's good to have a plan A, but plan B and C are equally important during a storm. So and then for a mandatory evacuation, or if you're going to evacuate, do it as early as possible. You'll avoid the congestion on the arteries going north, and it'll help you get there earlier. You'll have more time. If you pre-plan all of this, you'll be aware of the gas shortages. Absolutely take your pets. Please don't leave your pets in the house if you're evacuating. And make sure to gather supplies and valuables and key documents, of course. We all know to do that, but when we're scrambling, to get out and evacuate at the emergency level, then there are things that we'll miss. So it's good to have those in one place. Personally, I keep all of mine in a plastic file that I can grab and go if I need it. And that has always worked well for me.
Also, on the pets issue, one of the things that the Humane Society recommends is that you do the chip, because invariably if you have animals that are not in cages or get out of the cages and then you have to find them and then locate them, it becomes quite a scramble when you have massive structural damages. So the other suggestion was to make sure your animals are chipped, and I know we have a vet in the audience who probably would agree with that.
And this slide is just more information on hotels, family-friendly residence shelters. If you are evacuating, pets, you'll need to find either a shelter that's pet-friendly or a hotel that will accept pets. So that's something to think about in advance as well. There's also, there's bed and breakfast, Airbnbs, so forth and so on. They can be hard to come by. Reservations can be hard to come by at that point, but there's a number of different alternatives there. So plan that early if you can. Of course, consider staying with family and friends outside of the evacuation zone. And listen to the news media for opening shelters and which shelters are at capacity. At the end of the dais there, I have a list of the 2017 shelters that we had in Miami-Dade. And so a lot of those filled up, but that's the list for 2017. The county has not put out the 2018 list yet, but it'll give you at least a guideline to start looking at should you decide to go to a shelter.
Christian, one other thought, something I've always done is if you're going to leave, unplug as much stuff as you can. This way, in case you get any spikes of electricity. And the other thing I've always done also is take any extension cords off the ground. Elevate them, put them on the backs of chairs. Who knows if a window's going to break or something's going to happen. At least this way everything is safe.
And the other thing you can do that actually had a resident suggest, and I thought was a great idea, was to elevate things off the floor. If you have the potential for flooding, or the reason we're being evacuated is because of potential storm surge, the higher you get stuff off the ground, the more likely you can recover it. Now, depending on the velocity of the storm surge, et cetera, that will regulate that, but at least you've got then an idea of maybe your electronics equipment. Get as much stuff off the ground as you can that matters to you.
Okay, so pre-storm, what we can do as residents is, if you know of elderly or disabled residents, notify village staff and just let us know they're there. We're happy to do welfare checks. After Irma, we went around. We had a list of people that had, just said, "Will you check on me or check on this person after the storm and make sure they're okay?" And we did that. We had the police go out and make sure that those people were all okay and had weathered the storm well, since they didn't evacuate or couldn't evacuate. That's an important thing. So that's something you can do as residents to help the village to better help your neighbors. Construction sites, one of the things that property owners and contractors as well need to do is secure construction sites prior to storm arriving. There's a lot of projectiles there. Prior to Irma, we had village staff out shutting down construction sites, telling them to clean up. Some of them did, some of them didn't. We were fortunate. We had some residents that came out and helped us in Public Works as well clear up some of the sites and secure them. And so we just all worked together, and MAP is one of those. Thank you. So, but it was just a group effort to get all of these sites secured. This year, in preparation of that, we are handing out flyers to everyone that gets a permit from May through November in advance that reminds them they do have to secure their site should a storm arise. And then evacuation statuses. Evacuations are issued by Miami-Dade County Emergency. And again, we have the C and D zones that are the village. So listen for those on the news. That's important to hear. It may come at the last minute as well. It sort of did this year and surprised us all. And there was also some vague aspects to it because of the two different zones. Whether Biscayne, I believe they said Biscayne Park was evacuating, and it was only.
It was Key Biscayne. Yeah, there was a confusion between Key Biscayne and the village of Biscayne Park, and the mayor unfortunately inverted those two words, caused a panic, which we then had to tell everybody they weren't evacuating. And then at the 11th hour, they turned around and put an evacuation zone for us here. And so many people didn't take that seriously because they assumed it was still the mistake. So this was a very unfortunate issue. I think one of the lessons that we learned from this is that we will be in much greater and closer communication to make sure that whatever announcements are made, we are kept in that loop a lot sooner and more clear. But that was a challenge for us with the county this year, and that's something that we're working on.
And then, securing your home, we all know to do that. It's remarkable that in South Florida, with people who have second homes here, we'll get a call from Europe saying, "Hey, can you check on my house? Can you make sure my shutters are up?" That sort of thing. Well, no, we can't. that's something that the resident really has to be responsible for, because immediately prior to a storm, all of our village staff are going full force with our plans to secure everything we can as far as village property and make sure that residents are okay. We're concerned about people much more than property, and we want to make sure that all of our residents, survive as best as possible. And so, please make sure that you can secure your own home should a storm arise. And these are just additional planning resources. Again, once this is up on the website, you'll be able to click on these and look through. But we thought those would be helpful for additional information.
Manager, if I may, I just wanted to go back to one point you talked about the elderly and disabled residents. One of the challenges we had is, while we think we have a list of who might be on that list, many people were not. And these are usually the people that are have always been self-reliant. They're very shy to ask for help. They're not going to register themselves. They don't come out. We had people who had medical conditions that were quite significant, and we didn't find out till way late in the game. So I'm asking if you know of anybody prior to the storm to let us know. We will be very discreet about how to handle that, but at the same time, it is more important for us to know who these people are so we can check on them. Also, many of you went above and beyond helping your neighbors. I want to get a shout out to a lot of you, because I know not everybody asks for accolades, but it was a tremendous amount of work done by a lot of our community helping one another. And so for that, I want to thank all of you. But it will be helpful moving forward if you can help us know who these individuals are, because unless they register themselves, we don't know. Thank you.
Now, one of the things the village, or some of the things the village does prior to a storm, is we all meet with each department and as a group and brainstorm and plan. We had our meeting this week, in fact. The police chief, the clerk, public works, code, building department, all of us, and started to just get in our heads, it's hurricane season coming up again, and what we would do in the event of that. There's a lot of small things that really add up to major things, like making sure that prior to a storm, we've topped off our gas at Public Works so that our police officers have fuel, that we've, sheltered or turned all of our buildings or secured all of our buildings as much as possible. Public Works, tons of projectiles there on an average day, so we have to clean up that Public Works yard. And that's something that, those are just a small number of things that we do. We also have to start stockpiling emergency supplies for our EOC and for Public Works. Coordinate the Alpha Bravo Public Safety with the police chief. And what that means is that when the storm hits, we have an Alpha team and a Bravo team. The Alpha team comes in and they stay in until the Bravo team can get there to relieve them. And so what that meant during Irma was that, I believe it was Friday night, the Alpha team came in. They weren't able to switch out until Sunday, so we were there 24/7 through that whole portion of it. And Bravo came in, and they stayed for a couple days to relieve the Alpha team. But it was the officers on duty during that time were working 24 hours a day, until the next relief team came in. And so with that, it worked out well. We were fortunate during Irma that there wasn't a lot of calls for help. There was one that I particularly remember was, during the height of the storm, we got an emergency call. And our police, they have the option, if it's dangerous for them, I would prefer they not go out on calls if possible. But in this instance, it was one of our residents, and the police didn't hesitate. They went out. And she unfortunately got hit by a falling limb because she chose to walk her dog during the storm. So, pardon me. With that in mind, please make plans to curb your pets indoors some way during a storm if you're going to ride it out here. Don't risk our police officers for that, or your health for that matter. Pardon me. Additionally, some of the things that we do is, we make sure that all the contracts are in place and in compliance with FEMA's requirements. We're coordinating with disaster response contractors, conduct wellness checks for... Pardon me.
Take a minute.
I'm going to take a sip, please. disabled. Again, that's those who will let us, or those that we know about. And so we also, excuse me. Thank you, Bruce. Pardon me. We also coordinate with South Florida Water Management on the canal levels. And that's something that we got a lot of questions about last year is, well, the canals look full and they look empty now, and what's going on? And the way it works with South Florida Water Management is before the storm, they drain down the canals so that the water level is as low as possible. During the storm, when the storm surge is coming in, they open the locks so that the water will go back up the canal as far as possible and not overflow the banks near the coastline, which is really us. And so it's a matter of draining it down and then providing that open space for it to come back in and refill as much as possible without overflowing. Doesn't always work, but that's the plan that they've shared with us. And so, during this time in our preparation, we conduct monthly generator maintenance on all of our generators, make sure that they're fired up and ready to go. We check check and service the storm drains and grates throughout the village. That's been done already this year. We'll be checking those through the summer as well to make sure they remain clean and can absorb as much water as possible. Update and verify the contact list for all village personnel so that we can reach each other. And scheduling fuel deliveries, of course, fill all municipal vehicles prior to a storm, and then get an additional fuel delivery if possible after that, so that we're all running on full tanks in our vehicles at the start of the storm, and we have the backup tanks full at Public Works of both diesel and gasoline.
If I may, I just wanted to shout out to North Miami and thank you for their help.
Yes.
We had mutual aid agreements with North Miami who have been incredibly supportive. There was a real shortage problem with fuel and trying to get our individual to refill our tanks, and that became an issue, and they stepped in and stepped up and allowed us to reach out and get fuel if we needed it. So I just wanted to thank you to North Miami.
They were very gracious with that, absolutely, and worked well with us. So they were extraordinarily good neighbors throughout the storm. We oversee our mutual aid agreements between agencies. Again, that's exactly what we had with North Miami. Our fuel delivery, our final fuel delivery did not come in after we'd already topped up our cars. And so there was just very little fuel at Public Works. We immediately spoke with North Miami, and they welcomed us to their motor pool to fill up and do what we need to keep it going. And so, excuse me, until our fuel arrived. Our fuel arrived, I believe it was the Tuesday after the storm.
Yeah.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
again, visit all construction sites, confirm all communication systems are in place, radios, website. One of the things that we're looking at, and Commissioner Tudor brought this to our attention, is the Nixle system. And I've been speaking with them about getting this in place. And this is a text message push. It will be opt-in. You'll have to give us your cell phone number so that we can contact you through this. Miami Shores has been using this pardon me, for years, and it's working very well for them as far as communicating with residents. It allows us to send out emergency texts during cases like this, like if there's a boil water order, an evacuation order. The village could actually send this directly to your cell phone. And it also has excuse me, additional components that allows us to geo-target landlines in a certain area, so we can target just the village and put out a blast of phone calls to all landlines in the village, just letting people know of emergency warning. So, pardon me. So that's something that we are definitely looking at now. The cost of that is pretty nominal, and I think the benefits of it are exceedingly good.
So that's a shout out to everybody. Please sign up when we get the system, and also sign up for our e-blast. That would be very helpful.
That would be, yes. All of our e-blast, our database, the Nixle system will all be opt-in, with the exception of landlines, which are we can access. but the others will be opt-in, so we'll need the residents to sign up for those. And during the storm, realistically, during the storm, it's pretty much hunker down wherever you are and stay as safe as you can. It's what we do. At Village Hall, I was there with the police through the storm, and we went out, occasionally on calls if there was something going on. Overall, it was, pardon, it was a matter of just waiting out the storm. We surveyed the village for damage. Okay, I'm taking Roseanne's.
Take a minute, Commissioner.
Pardon me.
Take a minute.
But realistically, during the storm, it's a matter of staying inside. Please stay inside. We all get curious and want to walk around, see what's been damaged and what's going on. It's best not to do that, particularly during the eye of the storm, because you know the other side is coming. And so that is one of the things that we really want to stress. During the storm, for residents, if you have a life safety emergency, call 911. Emergency responders may not come out during the storm if it's in high winds. Excuse me. That's always a possibility. I can tell you that our officers, for any call we had, they did not hesitate. They jumped up and they ran, with the exception of one call, and that was life safety. We had property calls that we didn't respond to during the storm. At one point, we heard of a generator zooming down 10th Avenue, and it's like, okay, that's not life safety. That's a generator that someone didn't, secure. We didn't run out for that one during the height of the storm. But any life safety ones we did respond to. So definitely stay indoors. Don't walk your pets, please, or go outside until the storm passes. And remember that it's always life before property. We all work hard and accumulate our things that we love to have around us. But at the end of the day, none of it's worth anything if we're not here to enjoy it. And so it's always life before property. And we take that seriously, too, at the village. And our responses will always be life first, property second. And during the storm, the village is only staffed by essential personnel. The police and myself remain on site throughout the storm. One staff member is housed at the EOC Center in North Miami. This year, during Irma, I ran between Village Hall and the EOC Center so that we could continually get updates from them and then come back to Village Hall and be here on site as well. Fortunately, it's just at the police station in North Miami, which is a few blocks away, so I was able to get from Village Hall there and back pretty easily. Police may respond to life safety emergencies only, not property-related matters that we've covered. Excuse me. After the storm, and realistically, we encounter a different situation after the storm every time. No two storms are exactly alike. For life safety emergencies after the storm, again, 911 is your fastest method of getting help quickly. Down power lines impacting public safety, contact FPL. That's 800 for outage. If you see downed power lines that are live on the ground, you can also contact the village police via 911. We'll get someone out there to at least cordon that off with tape or barricades to just make sure that people can see it.
One word of advice about FP&L. Every morning, double check online to make sure you're still listed as being without power. Because it happened to us. Every morning we check, and every morning they said we were back on. Reported it again, and eventually it got fixed. But according to them, we had been repaired 5 times.
And I'll share this with you. My house got hit by lightning a few weeks before the storm. And I know there was a lot of conversation about, because of the storm, that's why the system went down. I had the same exact experience. I was told I was back up, and I was without power. So I know there's some definitive issues with FPL and that. I've talked to our representative about it. They're more than aware of what limitations they have on the meters. And the other thing that's not well understood, and we can go through this, I don't want to cut into your flow, but there is an assumption that they have an assessment team on the ground and they know every house that is out. To do that, they have to manually ping your meter to see whether or not they get a signal or not back. So that structure is not quite as robust as it may have been advertised from an engineering perspective, and I would venture to say that the manager and I did a lot of, with the help of the police, did a lot of the assessment pieces ourselves to determine who was up and down and communicated that directly to FPL outside of their system. That's all I'm going to talk about for now on that. We'll come back when you get to it.
Okay. And I spoke with FPL, our representative at FPL this week. I actually invited her to come speak today, and she wasn't available. But, I mentioned that to her and asked if FPL has corrected that. They think they have. We knew that a lot of times people would would open a ticket for FPL, and the next morning they still wouldn't have power, and the ticket would be closed. And FPL has supposedly fixed that. I would just watch it carefully if you can, if in fact you put in a ticket, to make sure that you put in a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth until they get you power.
And please let us know. I think it would be helpful if pre-storm, if this happens during, let's say, a tropical storm versus a hurricane, and you know that there's an issue, please let us know so we can help, at least try and help. We're not responsible for utilities, but politically we can try and at least raise the issue of why it's still not working.
Okay. And then look for unmarked road hazards as well. We'll try and barricade and tape up wherever we find, but that will, take a little while for us to get through the entire village, particularly if all the roads are not passable. So if you happen to see one, just let us know. You can contact our police department and let them know. Also very important, please don't ignore the barricades, the signage, tape, to alert others to unmarked hazards. We had a lot of residents who would say, well, I live down that road, and get very angry with our police if they were holding them up from getting home when they just needed to go around the block to get home safely as opposed to drive over a live power line. And so we encountered that quite a bit.
Not only
storm,
drivers, and I'll ask you to be kind to the staff. If they're asking you something, there is a reason for it. They're not just stopping you from going into your home. I had a jogger jump over a power line that was live and said, I asked him if he understood what caution tape was, and he said, yeah, I guess I should have read that more carefully. He literally was jumping over live power wires and jogging over them. So I encourage you tremendously to realize, I know you want to get back to whatever is normal post-storm, but simply there are areas that are, if you see anything that looks like a power wire and you don't know the difference between a cable and a power lighter, don't assume it's a live power wire and just stay away from it.
That's good advice, absolutely. And a lot of the lines that we'll see down may be cable or AT&T, but we'll just treat them all as if they're live power lines until we can get them removed. After the storm, one of the ways that we communicate with residents is through, well, we evaluate what we have to work with. It may be cell phones are working, it may be no power, computers are down. That's the situation we found ourselves in after Irma. What we did was we posted on every public building in the village where staff were located. We were located at the rec center, and drove people to that area if they needed help, had questions, that sort of thing. And that's going to be the same after every storm. Go to your nearest public building, and it will tell you, if we're not stationed at that building, it'll tell you where we are stationed. And so we're going to be stationed at the building that has power, hopefully. If it doesn't have power, then it'll be, the building in best condition for what we need to do to help the residents. And so, but that's something that I want you all to be aware of. So we need you to help us with that. We were fortunate that we had some great volunteers that helped, post these notices around the village on stop signs and, anywhere they could find electric poles, so forth. And but look for those. That will be our fail-safe as far as communication goes. Hopefully, with the Nixle system, we'll be able to reach your cell phones. And most of us, our cell phone service was spotty, but most of us could, find the right place where our cell phone would work if we, held one arm out here and the phone over here. We were able to communicate using those. And that was an important thing. So
I just want to inject something
Nixa
here.
will address that too.
I want to interject something with, unless you had satellite phone service and you were lucky enough to afford something like that, or walkie-talkies, or try to use a walkie-talkie app, there were different ways that people ended up going around trying to communicate. Same like Gas Buddy to try and find gas. There was a lot of solutions that residents would come with. But I will tell you this, that one of the things that I know for a fact is that there's no way any municipality can go door to door and tell you what's going on at every second post-storm. That's just not a reality. There were some people that had indicated that was what they were looking for. The reality is they kept saying we were small enough to do that. We're not that small. I've walked this village personally several times, and you don't have, that's not realistic. Realistic is find the local building. There may be letters that go out, but if you don't have internet service, it's of no use to you. If we do get the Nextel system, which I'm hoping we will do, that will help with some of that. But also, there may be specific things that you need for your family. We had one individual that had literally a really serious issue that he was not able to get resolved regarding a hot wire on his pipes. And these situations require 911. They require finding somebody in the village. You're going to have to find us. And there were a lot of police that are also, feel free to wave down a police officer if they're driving by and tell them you need help. So don't hesitate to find us. The us is few. You are the many. But we do need, it's very helpful when you all look out for one another, but also find us wherever we're located. We can't come to you every time. We do make welfare checks on the elderly and the disabled. I know that we did that. I did some of that. We had volunteers, thank you David, thank you Chuck, for going out and putting signs up all over the village to try and help mitigate some of the communication challenges. But ultimately, we need you all to find us and come to us and our staff wherever we're located. And that will depend on each storm, what structure is damaged or not damaged, where there's power, where there's not.
All right. And that really is it. I mean, our EOC Center is officially Village Hall. That building is hardened to winds of 175 miles an hour. Historically, our EOC Center was the rec center. That's hardened to winds of 145 miles an hour. So, excuse me. So through Irma, we stayed in Village Hall until after the storm. The rec center was the first one to receive power, so we moved from the Village Hall to the rec center immediately after the storm, as soon as power was on there. But again, every storm is different, so it'll be, what building has, allows the most accessibility to residents and the first one to have power. And that's why you can always go to any public building and find out where we're going to be located. Excuse me. Okay, after the storm, non-hazardous power outages, again, FPL 1-800-4-outage. FPL FPL is going to work first on getting the feeder lines. Those are the larger lines that bring power towards the village before they get into our drops and tertiary lines that are actually what we have in the village. So we're always going to be a little bit slower with FPL than some of the other areas. Pardon me. That's just really because we are a small municipality. We don't have a lot of multifamily here. FPL will look and say, who can we restore power to first? If they see a condo with 6,000 people in it, in a village with 3,000, and they have to fix one line for the condo and multiple lines for our village, they're going to go to the condo first.
Why don't you take a moment? I'll go over a few stats that may be helpful. FPL reported 815,650, or just under 80% of the accounts lost power in Miami-Dade County that were restored. The reason I'm mentioning that is I think when we look at our village, we also had very similar stats in terms of the percentage of our and I know you're going to go over that later on in the presentation. I just want to give him a chance to catch his breath here. But I think in the overall scheme of things, that is an enormous number of people in Miami-Dade County to be out. And so they were playing the numbers game, and the numbers game is the most essential. First, it was essential, buildings and hospitals and things like that. Next came the largest amount that they could get up, condos and things like that. tree-lined cities where they have to physically pull out poles, move things around, we were always on the bottom tier. And if they're candid and honest with us, which they were, they will do the best they can, but at the end of the day, they're playing the numbers game to get as many up as possible, and we're always going to be on that bottom tier.
So, again, we have no authority over FPL.
None.
We were on the phone with the governor's office throughout the storm, and FPL never forgot who the village was. I think they still remember us, in fact.
Oh, yeah.
We were pretty persistent. And,
Well, let me give a shout out, if I may. I'm going to give a shout out to several of our congressmen and our senators who played a tremendous role in getting trucks to roll into the village. To say the least, they were not happy with the amount of calls that all of us did to make sure they didn't forget us. And they did eventually respond and get us back up, I think, in a total of 10 days for almost everybody and 12 for the last few, correct? Yeah. But that's not, ultimately we have no say. What we can do is be very persistent in our encouragement that they roll trucks in here, which we did. Regularly, constantly, and endlessly.
And I don't know, for those of you who were here during Wilma, I don't know how long it took power to come back on then, but I know that we had the vast majority of the village covered in 10 days, and there were just a few houses that had to be specifically lit up that were done in the next 2. So
I know for
12
Wilma,
days.
I was without power, I think, for 6 days, and Katrina for 5, if I remember correctly.
I think it was much longer. I'll see. I
2
think
weeks?
I think it was over 14, and some
3
people
weeks?
were longer. And it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was 3 to 4 weeks for some.
Yeah, didn't
Yeah.
Bob Anderson has his out for 5 weeks or some ridiculous length of time?
For
Yeah.
a month, yeah.
And it was
so.
spotty because it was your neighbor could have power and you might not because you're on a different transformer or a different line.
There's apparently nothing more frustrating than have everybody lit up except you. And those folks we heard from regularly. And if I could have, I would have climbed up the pole and done something, but it became very frustrating, especially when we had some individuals that were handicapped and had serious medical issues, and we were screaming and yelling, and ultimately some of what they had were major issues that could not be quickly rectified.
It was amazing. On the north part of Griffing, they were without power, I think, for 7 days. They never lost internet service.
This was another thing I found that I learned, because people thought because I was the mayor, that's why I got the power back the fastest. Let me be clear, I was on the hardened line on 8th Avenue. That's where ours, and our drop to our house was not damaged. It really was that simple. But I kept, because at one point, the internet service for the village was my house for a short period of time. What was interesting is I found out later that my internet doesn't run on 8th Avenue on the lines, because I just assumed it did. It goes actually down 116th, up 7th Avenue, and then is buried part of the way. And I just got lucky in that there was no damage to those particular structures. So it's a very convoluted and because it's an old system here, it's also very hodgepodge in terms of how it's all put together in terms of, and I shouldn't say hodgepodge, I should say it's eclectically wired in that it's not uniform. And so that you don't, even troubleshooting from the workman's perspective was interesting for them, because they had to find where the problems were. That's why Comcast and AT&T was ultimately the secondary fix, a restoration after the lines and the poles were back up. But if you had underlying grounds and there were other issues, you could also not be up for a longer period of time because of that. I don't know if that was clear or not, but
If you have a neighbor with a generator, become friendly with them. I've got a generator, and I always run my lines to my neighbors' houses. So at least they always have, during the storm, they can always watch TV, and after the storm, the refrigerators are always on. The odd thing was, we've had satellite, I think, for the 20 years we've been here. We've never lost a satellite dish. And I would assume that was one of the things that would have gone, but it never has.
So boil water orders. There was some confusion about this as well. Our water, of course, comes from North Miami, and they will let us know when we need to boil water from their perspective. Post-storm, what we found was that as we moved trees that had fallen, sometimes the roots of the tree would pull up a water line, and it would open a water line here. So we kept the boil water order going a little longer than North Miami did, and that was me being extraordinarily cautious. We don't have sewers. It's not like our water lines run next to sewers. But if you're, getting brown water, most likely there's an opening in the water line, and I showered in it. I was here through the whole thing and showered in it too. I didn't drink it. I had bottled water like we all were supposed to do. But do listen to those. And if if North Miami says there's no boil water order, and the village says, please be cautious, be cautious. There are lines as well, and we know what's going on with them here. Usually before North Miami does, someone will call and report, hey, there's water shooting up over here, and or a tree has fallen and taken out this line.
And I just want to share with everybody that I know when you hear the word boil water order, it can mean that you have contamination, and usually it's associated with being adjacent to a sewer line, which is basically it's an open culvert. And so this is why they order boil water orders. In our case, it was more of an issue of we just want to make sure so that nobody got sick. And I think that's why the manager did that. I will say that you don't know when the trucks are moving through and moving giant trees. I'm sure you saw some of the size of the ficuses and some of the other trees that went down. The water pipes are entwined in those. And so even when they're trying to be cautious and not pull up those pipes, eventually some are going to break. When they go to push the logs, some of them can break from the weight, just the weight moving on it. So I think the precaution was made so that during the cleanup, we had, 4 or 5 at least, I think, or 6? I lost count of pipes that broke, at least. And so there was just a continuous on that. And one of the suggestions that's very simple in the old school is always keep a couple bottles of Clorox with you. There's a recipe, you can get it online for how to sterilize your water. Have propane or some sort of ability to boil water for those of you who don't have natural gas in your homes. But this is something that I've been accustomed to living in Florida my whole life. It's just something you have to live with. But I also wanted to make an issue about water. If you have a pool, you have water to flush your bathrooms in case the water pressure goes down. It's a bucket and water. Pour. You're done. If you have a pool, you pretty much have enough water supply to do most things. So I just want to share that with you because sometimes we rely on the plastic little water bottles, and if they run out of the store, we panic. If you have water before the storm, caulk your tub. If you have a tub, fill it up. There's your mini pool. So there's a lot of things you can do right before the storm to make sure you have sufficient water to get through 7 days in case there's an issue. Thank you, sir.
If I could interject something not necessarily related to the storm, but with our water pipes. It's a very old infrastructure, and if you're walking around and you see standing water where it's not supposed to be, somewhere on a median and it hasn't rained, most likely a truck drove over the median and the water pipe is broken. We need to report that as soon as we come across these incidents so North Miami can address the issue. And just something for you to be aware of when you're walking around. If you don't know the number for North Miami, and I don't have it off the top of my head, at least contact Village Hall so that we can get those pipes repaired as soon as possible.
I'll get that number for you right now. Keep going and I'll interject.
Okay.
Good.
And so, I mean, after the storm, there's, excuse me, there's numbers here for Comcast to report outages, for AT&T to report outages as well. Fire hazards, 911. And 911 for any life safety emergency like that is always going to be your best method of getting help quickly. Structural issues for unsafe structures, you can contact the village, and so or police department, either the building department or the police department, either one.
I have that number.
Okay.
And we'll make sure you can make sure we put this in the PowerPoint somewhere as well for folks. If there's a water main break or a fire hydrant leak, either way, during business hours, which is Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, it's 305-948-2960. And after hours on weekends, the emergencies may be reported to 305-652-6460. That's 652-6460.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, but this is straight off their website, but go ahead. Oh, I'm so sorry. Can we? I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? Because the number I gave was North Miami Beach. My apologies. Cancel all of that. Thank you, sir. 953. Is that after hours? Thank you, sir. Sorry. clicked on the wrong one.
Um, okay, so property security issues, police department, of course, remains vigilant on that. We were very fortunate through Irma that there was very little of those. I think a couple generators were taken, but beyond that, we were pretty secure throughout. Excuse me. Flooding from the canals, of course, let us know here at the village, but also South Florida Water Management District, they should know as well. Excuse me. Garbage collection will resume as soon as the roads are cleared. With that, Waste Pro, we have their number there. Excuse me. Waste Pro has their number there as well with collection issues, for collection issues. Bulk trash limits still apply once the trash pickup resumes. Assistance with roofing issues, there's Operation Blue Roof, including a link here. Excuse me. Domestic animal emergencies, and again, wildlife issues, contact Florida Fish and Wildlife, Pelican Harbor, or South Florida Wildlife Center. Some things that we do after the storm, and we being the village, is, of course, our first thing is maintain law, order, and safety. Our police are out all the time and working to make sure that we're all safe. We start immediately to clear roads to allow access for emergency vehicles, debris contractors, and utility vehicles. Irma moved out on a Sunday. We had grubs in here on Monday, starting to do the push. What that is they go through with heavy equipment, whatever's in the road. They push it to the sides of the roads, onto the medians, so that they can clear the roads for emergency vehicles and start getting equipment in. And that took 5 days to complete. Once that was done, they started collecting it immediately. Excuse me. And we assess and mitigate and barricade any areas that we see that are unsafe. Set up and staff the cooling centers and communication centers for the residents. Again, this time it was the rec center, and we'll see where we can do it next time. Conduct welfare checks on the elderly, provide assistance to any residents in need. And we participated also, the mayor and I and a few of the commissioners as well, participated in daily conference calls with the governor's emergency team. We'll have a new governor, next year, so hopefully they will do the same thing. That we found that extraordinarily useful.
It was. I must say, I want to give a shout out to Governor Scott on that. All of us were incredibly impressed with how he literally cut through every red tape, had every agency there from FEMA. There were so many agencies. DEO was there, and when we had the issue with FPL not coming here, it was during one of those calls that I actually interjected and said, I wonder if we could get some help. And within 5-10 minutes, I had a call, and action was taken to make sure we had direct communication with FPL and that we weren't getting the runaround. So I do want to give a shout out to the governor for that. Thank you.
We also coordinate with all hurricane debris related contractors and their subcontractors at this point, working to come up with the fastest way to clear the most streets and start getting our residents back to normal. We coordinate efforts between our contractors and the utilities, so that if there's a power line that's down and it's intermingled with debris in the road, that they can work together to make sure that gets cleared safely. We work with agencies responsible for debris monitoring and FEMA reporting as well. We work with utilities to have the services restored to all critical village buildings as quickly as possible, as well as to our residents. And then we check the roads, make sure that if there's any damage, we've taken care of that, or we're at least aware of it and have barricaded it. And manage the fund allocations, of course, to make sure that fund availability is there to pay contractors. So, Hurricane Irma, you can see here, that was a large storm. It's much larger than the state of Florida. It was a statewide event, and for us, that's what lucky looked like. We were so fortunate that Irma shifted west. We were, preparing for a much worse hurricane, and we actually got lucky. There was still a tremendous amount of debris. I can get the loop up on this. kind enough to, oh, that's not showing up there? Darn, okay.
reduce it first.
That's already reduced, so it's not going to show. Let me see if I can.
Escape in the PowerPoint. No.
Nope. Okay, we'll try that again.
Yep. Technology not cooperating.
See what I'm seeing up here. What I'm seeing here is different things. There we go.
Nope.
Now we're on. Hold on just a second. Let's see if we can. Technology. Gotta love it.
You're almost there. There you go.
There we go. And you can see armor rolling in there. Thank you to Brian McNulty, our local weather expert, for sharing these with us, and actually the next couple of slides he provided us with. Um, we originally thought that Irma was going to come up the east coast a little bit more, and fortunately it shifted west, and we were so fortunate that happened. It just saved the village a tremendous amount. And so, if I can get back to the PowerPoint now. Okay.
You're almost there. Give one more.
There we go. Okay. And then this is the Irma wind history. And with that, you can see that a lot of the winds that we had were not nearly as strong as were originally anticipated. I think Irma was actually considered more of a high-end tropical storm from the winds that we had. We still had a considerable amount of damage because of that. But according to Mr. McNulty, that was what the National Hurricane Center was reporting. And then rainfall as well. We had about a little over 8 inches of rain during that time here, which was substantial. And again, lucky. Had it been a direct hit as originally anticipated, it would have been much worse. So. And a data recap, as soon as the winds allowed, the police began surveying the damage to the village after Irma. Every road in the village had at least one tree down. Many had a lot more. We toured the village looking for down power lines and residents in need. We contacted emergency debris removal companies to begin working clearing streets immediately. Police conducted the welfare checks on known vulnerable residents. Our cooling center was set up. All streets in Biscayne Park were pushed in 5 days, except for 111. That had a power line intertangled with the tree, so it took us a couple extra days to get that done and sorted, because we had to coordinate that with FPL. And then removal of debris from medians and swales began just after the push was completed. We assisted residents as needed with questions, and most of those questions were, when will I have power again? And so power was restored to all but a handful of residents within 10 days, and I think we covered that. Over the next 2 months, all the debris was moved to staging areas on 114th Street and by Village Hall. By early December, all debris was reduced and disposed. There was approximately 40,000 cubic yards of debris. So that was a lot of debris for just a tropical storm. Work's continuing now to assure that we're reimbursed as fully as possible by FEMA. And currently, our request for reimbursement is at the CRC level in Virginia, which is the FEMA office that goes through all the details, looks at the procurement, looks at everything, and determines, what they feel that should get back. They've had a few questions, things like what landfill did we use? Do they burn? Do they bury there? And simple questions like that that we've addressed very quickly, and so it continues there. Once it's approved at the CRC level, our request goes to the state of Florida. Um, the federal government will issue or transfer money to the state. The state will add on their portion of it and then issue us a check.
If I may, I just want to interject something. I just had some additional stats, which I thought was really interesting, because I wanted to look at it from the big picture perspective, not just our little village. Miami-Dade County is home to about 2.7 million residents, 3,000 of which, of course, live here. This is some facts that I thought was interesting. The county called for evacuations for 660,000 residents, provided shelter for 31,000 evacuees approximately, 970 pets, 616 special need, and this occurred in about 43 centers and hospitals. They cleared 574 miles of road and cleaned up approximately just under 4 billion cubic yards of debris at a cost of $350 million. That's what a tropical storm did. I just wanted to share that with you, because as we move forward and we talk about high winds and securing and preparing for a storm, I wanted to show the magnitude of what something small can do to realize what we have to prepare for if something big really did happen. Thank you.
All right, and building resilience, and this is what really this meeting's all about, is making us as resilient as possible for the next storm that comes up. And it all sort of stems from the residents. There's the village staff as well that will work with it. There's the governor's emergency management team, Miami-Dade County Emergency Management, and then utilities such as FPL, AT&T, and Comcast. We all work together. A large part of all of our abilities to do this, to move forward, to work together, is what's reported to us from the residents. So don't be shy. Post-storm, come by, see us. If you see something that's a problem, we will certainly be trying to get to everyone as quickly as possible, but it does help us to let us know, hey, there's a power line down on 113th, or there's a water main break on 10th Avenue. And so that's a way that you can help us to get the services restored as quickly as possible.
And if you don't know if something's safe, ask, please. Ask. If you seriously have concerns, don't try and do something yourself, just ask.
Okay. If you can't be without power, consider installing your own generator. I mean, that's a self-reliance aspect. I think most of us have generators. All of our village buildings have generators. We've just purchased a new generator. We have to have Village Hall equipped to utilize that now. And so ultimately what I'd like to see happen at Village Hall is us to purchase a permanent gas generator, run a gas line from 113th Street, so that we're not having to refuel and all of that, and we can literally use that as our EOC center and run consistently through a storm.
And I do want to talk with some folks that may give you some options for those of you who don't have gas. One of the interesting things was you would see pictures on the news media of these giant generators being driven down. What a lot of they'll do is they'll stage areas where you can, for large buildings and businesses. So those of you who have businesses and have concerns, they actually, the bigger cities don't always have access to gas. So they'll actually, within a few days, have a backup diesel generator that they actually rent as part of their plans. I think you did some nice pictures here. I think there's a diesel, if I'm not mistaken, that's a diesel on the left and a gas on the right. So if you don't have natural gas, you can get a diesel generator. There are other options for you, because I know not everybody in the village has gas.
Essentially, it's all about being a self-reliant. I mean, of course, the village is always here. We're always going to help any way we can. There's 3,000 of you and 20 of us, and so as much as we try, we're not going to be able to help everybody. So anything you can do to be self-reliant benefits you. And then if there's comments, questions from the community, we're happy to field those.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for the manager before we move on to the community input? Thank you. That was a great presentation. Oh, you have? Go ahead. Commissioner Ross.
Talking about statistics, then I think it's important to realize the magnitude of the expense and the debris removal that took place in Dade County. But I wanted, since you touched on our request for reimbursement from FEMA, to give the village an idea, residents an idea of what our stake in it was,
Okay.
dollar-wise.
It was right at $1 million is what we've paid to contractors and so forth for this cleanup.
And then, because everyone doesn't know that FEMA and the state does only a percentage of that.
FEMA will reimburse 75% of that. It then goes to the state. Typically, the state reimburses another, let's see,
12 and a half?
12.5%, and then we would pay 12.5%. This year, the government or the governor sort of changed that. There's a section where it's at the 12.5%, and then it moves to, I think, an 80%, and then a 90%.
Depending on
and
the
then-
time of the expense.
Yeah, depending on the time of the expenses. So we're waiting to.
So they
see
covered
what
more,
the
not
board
less,
has.
is the point of that.
Thank you.
And the reality is, too, with FEMA, we have to have all our I's dotted, our T's crossed. We think we've done that. I think we've done that. The submittal has been up there. There's been no hard questions that we didn't have an answer ready for. And so I anticipate getting the maximum back from them on this reimbursement. Again, FEMA can come back in 5 years and do an audit on this and then say, well, gosh, we paid you too much. Now you owe us this money back. So that's, that's
Yeah.
part of the joys of dealing with them. But
And for anyone who wasn't attuned to village politics back then, we actually had to pay back FEMA about $60,000 from Hurricane Wilma. Yeah, and so it did take that long to come back to us.
Yeah, they also went back to North Miami Beach, and they said the area that they had disposed of it was not a legal area, even though North Miami Beach was told it was. And I think they got stuck for about $250,000 5 years later.
So it's a work in progress.
always.
And I do know we hired contractors that had the experience with FEMA, and I know you're working. I'm sure you'll get into preparing for this upcoming. I know you're working on contracts now to
We
make
are,
sure. You want to
yeah.
talk about that a little bit so that
Yes.
they know.
Sure. We're working on these contracts now. We're going to send out RFPs for our monitoring and for our debris removal. Both FEMA requirements changed. One of the big questions about last year was, now FEMA doesn't allow piggybacking, which is a standard practice in Florida. It means simply that what we were able to do last year, we piggybacked off a Hernando County contract, which meant that we had a much better rate for our debris removal than most of the people in Miami-Dade. FEMA doesn't allow piggybacking anymore, so we have to go to RFP and follow all the new FEMA guidelines to make sure that we're right on target with them for this year. Should there be another storm, we don't want to have that even be a question. And so.
And I think one of the lessons I learned in this is it was ever so changing. One of the major issues that was on the governor's call that was talked about almost every single day that they had the call, was the fact that there weren't enough contractors, and people were poaching contractors from each other, so the rates would go up tremendously for hauling. Construction companies were losing workers right and left. It became a real serious issue. I will make a shout out to our manager. I don't know how you managed that contract, but thank you. We paid $3 for hauling, where everybody else I know paid between, I think, 10 to 17 from most folks I spoke to, with an average of about $14 for hauling. Is that about right?
We got lucky on the Hernando County contract. Grubbs realized that after the fact and promised me they would never let us do that again. But we were very fortunate on that.
So our costs, I know millions, and that's a tremendous amount of money, but our costs were significant, without putting our sister cities at risk here, but their cost was tremendously for the same amount of debris. They paid significantly more, and their rates were much higher.
So
I'm not sure we'll get that lucky again, but
we'll take luck where we can find it.
all right. Let's go ahead and open up for the community.
Okay, let me answer that real quickly. There's certainly cell phones we found during Irma. They did work to some extent. You can charge them in your vehicles. I certainly did that throughout the storm. And so getting electricity and keeping them charged is something feasible. Sometimes they may not work in one location, but with all of the networks around, you can usually go to just walk to a different location and get at least some service. So cell phones are still that. I mean, if there's electricity, if there's no electricity, if there's no cell service, if there's no phone service, I mean, then we are down to paper and going door to door. And and we
So, there, I'm sorry. I just have a question because this is one of the issues in terms of radio and communication. We can look into having our own radio and our own tower. That is something we can do. We had talked about that. One of the challenges is people actually using their radios because we're so used to technology in a certain way. It's very interesting to see the different age groups look at different things, and we want to maximize that. But I will tell you that I'm still in belief that if we are that devastated where we lose all of our towers, we'll be losing a lot of our structures. And so the chances of being able to communicate in any way, and I think if you look at other places like Puerto Rico that had tremendous infrastructure and are still recovering now from Maria, I think one of the, and I've talked to several folks that I know about it, I've talked to engineering departments, ultimately satellite phones, things that military folks use, these are the only ways to really set up a system. When that happens, usually federal agencies and federal governments move in to make cell phones work again by setting up their own systems. So I therefore don't concur that the cell phone won't be the most viable choice, only because that's usually what happens, and that has what happened in Harvey and Maria, where our military moves in and our National Guard moves in, and they set up systems so that cell phones do work, because they know that's what everybody has. If we try to move away to a radio system, I almost think there's going to be, and I'm not saying we can't do that, but I almost think it's going to be a divergent group. Those who have radios who are going to try and get on the radio to listen, and those who don't. And so that's my only concern. That's
Okay, Christian, before we could,
no, and Nicole,
if I
that's
could
something that
interject,
we are looking
because
into.
okay,
there's
whatever comments
several
from the audience, we're not going to be able to pick them up. They're not going to be heard. So if we can get a mic out there, because whatever questions are brought here, I'm sure other people who view this video will have the same questions. And that way we only have one person speaking out there. Hold on, Nicole. Nicole, hold on, hold on.
Oh. Okay, great. So I'm official now. Can everyone hear me? Great, okay. I wanted to say that I know during the last storm, from what I heard from our neighborhood was people were very upset, people were very angry and disappointed in the response from our village staff and commission. So I think that the major, the collective tone was the communication factor was lacking. So I think any form of communication that just is very thorough and to the point of, for example, we're referring to Miami-Dade's after hurricane preparedness, AM station 52, you can reach that. It's just saying it, communicating it to the residents in a way that we're able to receive it.
I'd like to, if I may comment to that. One of the issues is there's kind of a twofold issue. One is that we want localized information such as boil water orders, because that really was from the frustration that I heard, and I drove around every day, all day. The issue was, why are we on a boil water order if North Miami isn't? That seemed to be one of the issues, which I'm hoping we'll correct ahead of time with this presentation and a newsletter that we're working on that will help with that. Because there's local information, and then there's the big picture, when am I getting my power up? I didn't hear a lot of complaints about the fact that everybody knew Monday was the deadline, because however they were getting their communication, everybody knew that that they were going to get up in 10 days. That was clearly sent out, and people found that information. Where the struggle was in trying to find information that was specific to our village. And for that, there is a reality, which is we will be at physical locations, and people will have to be able to come and pick up printouts and flyers, which the manager did every single day. Posted stuff all over the village. I don't know how many times you all both did it. You're sitting next to each other. You could probably tell me, but you did it regularly as well. So there are limitations to the real-time information. With Nixtel, I think that will help. Once again, if we get hit by a storm in which there is severe and significant structural damage, the reality is infrastructures are impacted. And there's no way I'm going to sit there and tell you that we can do things that we can't do. There are things we can do within the limitations of Mother Nature. But there are some things that we just have to adapt to short-term until it's repaired. We were talking 10 days. But the information, real-time, day-to-day stuff, that is going to be found at whatever physical location we have if, and this is the if our phone lines were not working. Okay, if our, in this case, it was a weird thing in that our phones weren't working because they didn't know we were an essential structure. I have no idea how FPL messed that up, but we had to fix that and get the village hall up as fast as possible. And I don't know why FPL blew that, but they did. So that's why there was a delay in your ability to reach people by phone, which is, I think, where the frustration came in. Hopefully we've had that rectified. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, yes. Apparently, they did not realize that our EOC Center had moved last year to Village Hall, and so the power was restored to the rec center quickly. It was not restored to Village Hall itself until I think it was 5 days or 6
Right.
days. And so there was that delay there. We were stationed at the rec center, and we did, anyone that went to Village Hall looking for help could see a note on the door saying where we were, and that's always going to be the first step for residents.
I understand that.
So,
Residents,
yeah.
us 13 people that are here, were aware of that. As I went to the village hall, you guys came to my house and used my internet to communicate, to
Absolutely.
make
And thank you for
payroll
that,
was
by the
with
way.
my internet. I know that.
Yeah.
My thing is, like you said, all of the information is, what was lacking was localized information. And as a resident, I think that falls on the village to ensure that gets out and being proactive to get it out as far advance before the storm. Like what I came here expecting was that outlined for me. What can I expect that's going to be outlined for me before the storm? And on another note,
If I may say something about that, people that still actually have a landline phone, which probably nobody in this room has anymore. Do you actually
Raise your hand if you have a landline phone.
Do you
Let's see.
have Infinity?
One,
Do you have
two.
Infinity phones?
I have a landline phone.
Do you have a?
I don't know what infinity means. I have it through
I'm sorry,
AT&T.
can you pass Mr. Redmond the phone? Thank you.
Okay, what I'm saying
Redmond.
is, most people now are using a VoIP phone, which actually is voice over internet.
Right, no, I don't have that.
Okay, so if you have a landline phone, because people did, it still works. It was amazing. It still worked.
Great.
So that part did work. And what I wound up doing was, I used to go up to Cream Cafe. They had internet, oddly enough.
No, I
and I
understand
can make
there's
phone
many
there.
ways of doing it,
Right.
and I'm not trying to enter into a debate about it. I'm saying this was the collective information from the residents that we saw next door, we saw in the immediate aftermath of the storm at commission meetings and such. If you were unaware of it, okay.
Yeah.
My other question that was of a concern to me was for the village construction plan procedures for securing job sites. I know that you had covered that there. I'd like to see a more detailed plan as to who's going to visit these construction sites. Is it our building inspector? Is it our code?
It's our building official. It's our
Our
code
buil-
officers. It's our building permit coordinator.
Okay.
It's everyone we have available at that time, at the time it becomes necessary.
Okay, great. And what is the plan to secure these job sites in the event that the homeowner or the contractor fails to do so? Are there consequences in line in the event that they fail to do so? And is there a fee schedule in place to invoice homeowners or contractors in the event that the village staff has to step in to secure the job site prior to a storm?
Okay, you had about 4 questions in that one, so let's try and take them one at a time.
I wanted to
here.
get them out before I was interrupted.
I understand. Okay, so the first question is there a plan to make sure that the contractors and the homeowners do this? Yes, it is, and we have already started letting everyone who's got a permit know, hurricane season's up, They are responsible for this. Now, what we ran into last year was there was some that just didn't do it, plain and simple. In those cases, we sent out public works, we sent out staff, we got volunteers, and went out there ourselves and did it. And
Right, so I think that, we have to pay Public Works, we have to pay all these people to go out and do that. Are we
Right.
charging homeowners?
we
that
do
fee?
charge it
You
back
do.
to them. There are fines involved in this, absolutely. And if there's a direct labor charge as well, we do charge that.
Okay, great.
If I may,
Commissioner Ross, we're going to try and do this in an orderly way if we can. Commissioner Ross.
That's an excellent idea. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
To-
In our free time.
No, that may be part of when you're doing the cleanup contract. Maybe you can talk to H2O and see if they have a suggestion on that as well. Yeah. Thank you. Are there any other
Yes, David.
David?
So I guess as a follow-up to the last question, and I think if you looked into something like a radio or this other Nixel or Nixtel, whatever the system is, I think anything you could do to help is good. Nixel? Okay,
Nixel.
thank you. Whatever system that you could do,
Rhymes with Nextel.
great. If it is a radio system, I guess you also have to look at staffing that. Who's going to be sitting there saying, "Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Vietnam." Whatever. I mean, you're going to have to do. Somebody's going to have to do that, and somebody's going to have to staff it. But I do also think, as one of the people who was going around handing out, and posting signs, there was some value to that. And I can tell you, as a former resident of Miami Beach, whose house was, on the water and water in the back like this, nobody from the city came to my house ever in 30 years during any storm. Nobody posted any signs. Nobody told us anything ever, other than you'd see the police department on the street who basically told you to leave if it was bad, which they wouldn't enforce
You were
either.
on your own.
But nobody would do that. So here, I think the value of going around and posting these signs, because Amy and I and Chuck went around and we kind of split up the areas, people stopped us almost every place I was putting up a sign, what's going on. And I also went and walked over to City Hall in North Miami to see if they had a boil water sign, because Christian had signs up, and I said, well, what's the city doing? In North Miami, they were shuttered. There was nobody there, nobody talking, nobody telling you anything. So, I mean, on the plus side, we had this stuff going on. Yeah, it is very small town, whatever, but I think that this wasn't an organized effort. Chuck and I were in the rec center, and somebody was in there complaining about not knowing what was going on. And we said, all right, we'll go put up signs. But maybe now that we have, I don't know what the appropriate, venue for this is, Madam Mayor, commissioners, Christian, whoever you decide, but maybe this new public safety committee, Mike's on there, I'm not sure who else from the audience or who else is involved.
There are 2 members here as we speak.
Well, maybe there's a group of volunteers through them or some other event that's organized to do some of this stuff, to check, make sure we have the list of elderly residents, put up the signs, because stuff fails. People don't have their phones. People don't have their radios. I mean, I only had my cell phone working because my next door neighbor had his power back the day of, not even the day after, and I was 5 days out, and he threw an extension cord over the fence for me. But otherwise, I wouldn't have had any way of knowing what was going on. So those signs and going around and talking to people is really good. So if people wanted to volunteer, I mean, I would volunteer. I'm sure I don't know who else would, but to be on a little committee of hurricane committee that we go and we do stuff before, after, not during, but just
No,
just
and I
throwing that
encourage
out there.
you in the first meeting. I believe it's the first meeting. I know you're
First
getting ready to
meeting's
post it.
May 30th.
May 30th, to come in and speak to the Public Safety Board, Advisory Board. I think that's a great beginning and start. I do think that this city always goes above and beyond to try and help residents in any way they can. I was very proud of the fact that our electeds were out. I know I was out passing out water to elderly and doing welfare checks, as we should be. It was all hands on deck. Everybody did everything they could. But I do think there is, and I do caution everybody to understand that we will not be able to get to everybody and be in every place. It's just not a feasible reality. And so I want to make sure, and this was a great trial run in the sense that we all had a storm that wasn't catastrophic, that didn't have building damage. And so this is a great trial run to see what worked, what didn't, what we need to improve on, and that's why we are here today. My hope is that you come in with the Public Safety Board, Advisory Board, and come up with all suggestions and solutions as much as you can. I'm open to hear anything anybody has to say. I do believe that ultimately, though, that personal resilience and personal responsibility, if you look at the sheer numbers in Miami-Dade County, if a storm hits, it could be devastating, and we really all need to be able to be cognizant of the fact that sometimes technology works, and when it works, it's great, but when it doesn't, it is quite stressful for everybody involved. And that includes the staff. I do want to shout out to every single resident, and there were many unsung folks. I heard of a lady who was in her 70s that went over to help another lady who was in her 70s, and they were out there cleaning the yard with a rake trying to help clear debris. I mean, the stories that would go on endless. There were some folks here that just left that helped out with chainsaws and helped people out. I do think we are the little village who can and does, and so I don't want to understate the fact that we're all here because we are that village. And I'm sorry, I think Commissioner Johnson Sardella had some things to say, and I didn't want to.
No, I was just going to be really quick. I just was going to agree with David that I think you should reach out to the Public Safety Advisory Board. I was out after the hurricane, and you are right that walking out there with those notices is helpful because you get to see what's going on and you can help your neighbor. I called in some down power lines, tree branches that I thought were going to fall. If maybe an idea is taking the map of our village and divvying it up into sections so that volunteers can have certain sections to walk through. Even the commissioner, there's 5 of us. If, let's say, divvy our whole community up into 5 sections, and we can work it out that way. A question that I had for you, Christian, actually, I know we used to have like our police sign out there, and I don't know if we have if it's solar powered. I know that it's not working right now.
The light board?
Yeah,
Light
the light
board.
board.
But that could be another option if we could get one that's solar powered, and we can have those notices out there rather than in conjunction with the pieces of paper, but people that have been out and about and they can see the sign that notifies them of something.
The light board, unfortunately, it's cost prohibitive to repair, so we really need to we really do need to purchase a new one.
Okay.
And I think that's a great idea. That's a phenomenal tool that we've had. And
What's the cost of that?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
But Cesar, do you know by chance? Is that something that you've priced out?
My recollection is that it was somewhere around. Yeah.
Each panel is $250 to repair. That's each one of those letters. We have a total of 12 to 16 of them out. If we were to get new panels, we're looking at $400 each panel. So
Have we priced what the cost would be just to buy a new one?
I think Commissioner Ross, if you don't have that information, she might.
for that, I'm going to have to find out what the actual cost for a new one is, but I do know that to repair one, it's just a whole lot cheaper to buy a new one. It's just one of those situations.
Commissioner Ross?
My recollection when we looked into it last was it was somewhere around 30,000 for the light board. And I've suggested, I hope that we can move in that direction, that if we were to put up a bus shelter at behind Village Hall, we could use one side of that bus shelter to have something like a light board, a message board that we could pay for with CITT dollars rather than village dollars. And those are monies that have to be used very specifically within transportation, and we can't use them for anything else. I think it'll serve a dual purpose and have a good way of communicating to our residents.
Thank you.
Thank you. Roseanne? Mm-hmm.
My understanding is the protocol is if there's sustained winds of 35 miles per hour or more, they're not to respond.
I think it's 45, Jeff.
Ours did, but on the one thing that you said, this lady got hit by a limb from this line. But even if it's 45, I mean, people should understand that don't expect emergency personnel to come out once the storm hits you.
Right.
You did emphasize it, but I think the assumption should be there's a boil water effect until you learn otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
It's very simple. It's not very complicated. The boil water effect until you learn otherwise, because all the things that Tracy said about the trees uprooting the pipe, so it's very simple. No, that's about it. I wanted to just let me know if you wanted to try to help organize it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take all the volunteers we can get.
Turned it off.
Yes, go ahead, Art.
All right, so quick question. Two quick questions. Number one, have we identified a debris field?
We have, right now, we're looking at the field at the rec center
Mm-hmm.
to be our debris field. We've been working with Durham on this, trying to get them to come out here and give us specifics. We are a built-out city or a built-out village, so a large part of it will be, that's the only large vacant area we have
Right.
that can possibly work right now.
Okay.
I am looking at other areas outside of the village,
Mm-hmm.
which if we can find one that's close by that makes transport feasible,
Mm-hmm.
then we can certainly look at that too.
Okay.
Right now, it would be the rec center would be one, but we need to have really 2 to 3 debris staging areas that are permitted. I would have never thought in a million years to use the median on 114th Street, but this year all the trees blew down in it.
Mhm.
So suddenly it was, it was pretty vacant and open.
Right.
And that will be, that will be one of those things that we'll have to really utilize after the storm, or really determine after the storm.
So will we have that obviously in place prior to hurricane season? Will we
Yes.
have an identified debris field?
Yeah, currently it is the rec center, and we've already spoken with Durham about
Okay.
that.
Okay.
The state of Florida also is involved in this, in approving it.
Got it.
And so we're waiting to get the actual permit, but it's not at all unusual to have an after-the-fact permit for a debris field.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that, if I may. Depending on the strength of the storm, the damage of the storm, the materials that have been damaged,
Right.
this becomes a very different issue. This particular storm was yard debris. It was not major materials like roofing materials.
Right.
Everything changes depending on what happens. So we will pre-plan, we will get permits, and they've changed the rules and regulations as well. So that's part of the chase the regulation game.
Mhm.
But after speaking on the phone, I know I've reached out to Durham. My concern is that we have multiple abilities to be a little bit flexible because we are so built out, if we can't find outside locations. Outside light cushions are ideal. That's ultimately, ideally would be best for us. There's a cost.
Right.
None of those things are free.
Of course.
So there's a budget issue in understanding that. From 2005 till now, we've always used the church center. It becomes more complicated when you have a lot of debris. So you know, if you have a storm that hits next year, we're not going to have the same quantity debris likely because we've had a lot of the trimming going on. FPL was in here afterwards. They did a lot of trimming right after the storm. So we'll have less amount of debris. So a lot of this comes down to we will have a plan, we will have a location in sight, but at the end of the day,
Depends.
you're going to be sitting there playing the game of, hi, this has all changed, what do we do now, Durham, and be on the phone with them. And so that's where some of the adaptability and resiliency comes in. We're just going to have to deal with that.
All right, and my second question is, well, FP&L is horrible. I'm not happy. I'm not happy with FP&L. I hired tree trimmers to come out to my house prior to the storm to trim trees. I have a what do you call it? Transformer right outside the house with a tree 6 inches away from the transformers. The tree people refused to even get close to it because it was too close to the transformer. Called FP&L to come out, take a look at the tree. They said, nah, we're not gonna touch it. You got to call us back, and we'll come and disconnect. Bring your people. So I have to coordinate the entire thing, which makes no sense to me. But okay. Having said that, from a village standpoint, obviously power is one of the most important things after a storm. I don't know. I'm glad a lot of people were up in 10 days. It took me 2 weeks. And I think the mayor said it best. We got to prepare for the worst, right? And what we had was just like nothing compared to what we could potentially have. So my question to you all is, from a village standpoint or from an FP&L standpoint, there's certain things we can do and certain things we can't do that's out of our control. But do we as a village, or does FP&L come in and identify weaknesses in our infrastructure, in our grid, in our area? Or are we just relying on residents to say, hey, that tree's over my transformer? Or are we being proactive in going out the village, or FP&L coming into the village and identifying weaknesses in the infrastructure? Because obviously that's huge.
Sure. And I don't know that FPL actually comes out and does that.
Well, may I?
Please.
My understanding, and I'm not going to pretend to say I understand everything FPL thinks or does. I'm not sure they openly discuss a lot of that. I will say that they have a strategy, and their strategy is there's a lot of lawsuits going out there right now regarding what they promised and what they delivered. I will tell you that I support hardened poles for our village over underground lines. Commissioner Tudor, just for example, did a quick, he got some information which was very helpful. It was just, I think, $10.5 million.
Yeah, 10.5.
And this is not doing the lines from your house down. It didn't include a bunch of other things, so we're probably talking, I'm going to estimate around $15 million to bury lines. And then what nobody tells you is the lines coming into the community aren't buried. So it wouldn't solve the problem, which is I want power and I want power now. Right. That's what we all want. None of us want to be sitting here in August in the heat or have conditions that require us to have electricity. So if you put the cost of just taking your line, dropping it, burying it to your house, and then upgrading all your electric because you have to come up to code, if you add that up or go to a hotel for a week just to get cool, it's a lot less expensive. And I've got some electrical folks here. It's a lot less money to put in your own generator. And so I'm encouraging people to do that who know they need that, okay? And then helping out neighbors as needed. And I share this with you because you can buy an ice maker for $100 and that'll give you your ice. If you want ice and hot showers or small things like that, it's a lot less expensive other means to do that. But if you need electric and you've got respiratory issues or you just can't take the heat, whatever it is, and or medical conditions, and you need it, it is so much less money to put in a generator, assuming you have natural gas. I haven't priced the cost of diesel generators. Mike, do you have any idea what that would run? No. I can't imagine to be that much difference for a diesel generator. So my thoughts as a person living next to you and a neighbor, get your generators, get them now. Start looking at the cost of that.
You're talking about gas-powered generators?
Diesel. Natural gas or diesel. There are two different kinds.
That's what, $5,000 to $10,000?
I think my neighbor put one in for about 5 or 6, if I'm not mistaken.
So it's between 5 and 10.
It's not a
depending
small.
on how much power you want.
Will just did it.
It depends on if it's a portable or standby. Standby generator, which we're just about to get final gas hookup to. 22 kilowatt, which is more than enough to power a typical home. You're looking at, typically $6,000-7,000
Yeah,
for a
it's
22
again, my
kilowatt.
point.
But then the
10.
other thing is you got to pretty much double that price for the installation and everything that goes along
And the
with
gas hookup and everything.
One thing that you can do, because it can be cost prohibitive, there is a program in Florida, PACE program, and one of the companies that does financing is Y-Green, and you can actually do the program through them, and they actually will break that cost out over a period of time, and it'll go on your tax bill. So it'll be part of your escrow payment. That's something that people can consider if it is really a cost prohibitive issue, but you want to do it.
Right.
Thinking about, I want to kind of address about FPL. I had the same
Yeah.
issue as you. 2 weeks
Yes.
without power.
Yeah.
I've been very unhappy with the response from FPL from this last hurricane. I haven't been happy with FPL with the response since the hurricane. It took a while for me to get the estimate for undergrounding. I've asked them, and it's been over a month now, and I haven't had a response back, and I got to follow up with them on, what kind of hardening plan can they provide us for the village? What options do we have? Also, we have some of our existing wooden poles. You probably noticed some of them have quite a lean to them. I've reported, and there's one down here off of 8th, and I think it's in one of the little cul-de-sac. I don't know if it's 116th, maybe 17th, but the pole, I'm surprised it hasn't fallen over. It has such a lean to it, but once again, it's trying to get FPL to come out and do something about it. I've reported to FPL,
horrible.
and still
Horrible.
no response.
Th-
So
there's-
it's something that it's difficult for our community since we are kind of a small fish in a big pond.
And we have older
Yeah,
infrastructure.
and trying to hold their feet to the fire, and that's probably one of the most, what I'm discovering is probably one of the most difficult things.
Yeah.
There is a
There are.
lot.
There's
lot.
and there's also if you're a woodpecker fan, you don't want them to be on your FPL poles, and they are. And these transformers weigh what, 500-600 pounds approximately, probably. I think, and I'm glad we have a public safety board and Crime Watch and folks to look at these things, because there needs to be a lot more pressure put on FPL to replace poles more frequently. The kinds of poles they should be replacing them with, the types of lines, and I'll let Mr. Redmond speak more about that than I can, because I'm not an electrician and I don't know enough about the lines, but I will tell you that we have some very old infrastructure. What concerns me are lines that are also in back areas and that are harder to get to. Those folks definitely had more challenges in terms of getting the power back up to them. The reason you keep hearing me say generator is my neighbor put one in. They have a gas generator. And they cannot brag enough to me every time power goes out, how they never lost an ounce and how they're sitting in cool air conditioning, and they invite me over frequently, and I have when I had the power go down and my house got hit by lightning and so forth, and spent some time over there when I had my house tented and all of that. They never go without power. And I think ultimately that really is critical for most people. I don't think any of us here can say that we can honestly fix the FPL issue and what they're going to address, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you I can. I can tell you that I spent a whole lot of time on the phone with a lot of political people regarding FPL and response and what was needed. I will tell you that they were also overwhelmed by the size of the storm. If you'd be so kind as to back up to that storm. I am not trying to defend FPL, but I do know and understand that when you plan for things, you don't plan for that. There wasn't enough workers, and the workers that were here were from out of state. And many of them that came from out of state were told to come trim trees. When I finally looked at one of them, I said, "You've now trimmed that tree 5 times. I don't need that tree trimmed anymore. I need a lot of other stuff trimmed while you're here."
Right.
So there was a definite problem with their tree trimming, how that was done pre-storm. There's a definite issue regarding hardening and how much money went into it and didn't go into it. And then there is the reality of a storm of any significant magnitude and the manpower, no matter, it just finished Harvey. Everybody was shifted over to Texas. Then you have another storm coming, and then it was massive, and they had to come down from Georgia through the same routes to get to us. And then you had Maria. So if you looked at, and I just want to be realistic here. If you look at Puerto Rico, they're closing 400, I think, and 30 some odd schools because they can't fix them in time. They're trying to figure out how to deal with blue tarps, and they had no tarps, and they had 3 contractors apparently trying to find tarps, and the rules said they couldn't get them from China. It took 2 contractors to argue, yes, we're getting them from China. So there's a lot of problems associated with any massive and imminent response to a large storm. I'm a firm believer in self-reliance. I'm a firm believer in us being able to help one another and not wait for somebody else to come to us, and the people in New Orleans know exactly what that feels like. So I don't want us caught waiting for other people. It'd be nice if blue tarps were waiting around the corner for all of us, but in Puerto Rico there were none, literally 0. They had shipped them out to other locations.
But I think that you're kind of answering my question, but the point is that I'm trying to make is that I think that being proactive from a village standpoint and going out and identifying whether it's through code or whether somebody identifying, listen, this could potentially be my house, my 6 inches from my transformer, a strong wind, that transformer is going to blow, the entire block's going to go. Identifying that prior to the storm, whether it's FP&L or whether it's the homeowner themselves having to address that issue. I'm addressing that issue before the storm. But I have to coordinate the whole thing because FP&L said, call us and we'll come out and disconnect the power. You got to have your tree trimmers here at the same time. It's a pain in the butt that I have to do all that coordination, but I'm going to do it because it's not only in my best interest, it's also in the best interest for my entire block and for my whole area.
But the fact that you're willing to foot the cost for that bothers me, because I don't think that should be on you. And I'll work with you after this, because I don't think that should be on you. I think that's you pay a fee in your bill, I know, but you pay a fee in your bill to make sure these things are done.
Yeah.
And so I think that is part of my issue with what you're saying. I applaud you for doing what you're doing, Art, but at the end of the day, that shouldn't be on you. And I mean that.
And I appreciate that, but I think that we have to do that village-wide to make
Agreed.
sure that all homeowners are on top of their, whatever issues they may have prior to the storm, because after the storm, it's too late.
And I'd like to make a comment just following up on that, Art, because I have friends that live in Miami Shores that had the same issue with FP&L, on the phone constantly trying to get them to repair a power line that, or I should say a pole, like our wood poles, that was leaning into their property, and FPL wasn't doing anything. And I think it's something that like our code officers on their treks out to keep an eye on these things, because they might have to coordinate with that resident to get that done. In this instance, my friends, the FPL didn't do anything until finally the power line came down and their whole backyard was on fire. So, you're right that we have to keep an eye on these things, because if it's a code violation of that neighbor, let's say, that's not getting their trees trimmed in their backyard, and I know it's difficult because you can't, let's say, see a backyard, and that's why neighbors also have to be vigilant in reporting these type of things so that we don't have a disaster like that.
And I also want to make a shout out, because folks may watch this video. Please, if you have power lines down now, or you have trees that are in the high line powers, not in the AT&T or Comcast cables, if you're aware of that, please let FPL know. If you're not having any success, please let us know. We want to know now, because we don't want to have to be helping you trying later once the power's down. We'd rather try and avoid that. Also, I want to make a statement that I was surprised when FPL didn't have assessment teams on the ground. They had trucks here to trim trees from all over the place. But they really didn't have anybody at night. And I always tell the joke story that I went out at 4 in the morning with Rhonda, and we almost got pulled over and arrested because they were doing a nice job making sure our properties were protected in the pitch black, figuring out who was out. And we did this along with the police, and after that, the manager slapped me and had the police do it instead. But we tracked every night where the power was still out. We literally drove by with flashlights, and we were hoping nobody thought we were trying to, hurt them. And that's another thing. Please make your street, I think you've talked about this a bunch of times, please make your numbers on your houses visible as clearly as possible. But being able to assess that, I think that was shocking to me, that this was left up to our community to do for ourselves, but apparently was a very common practice. So that's another struggle. And that's why I keep going back to, if you can afford it, and if nothing else, try and have some sort of backup plan. Because it is, we don't have competition. It is one company, and it is ultimately up to them, and we do not have any say over what FPL does or does not do.
On that same issue of FPL and the power, the infrastructure that helps deliver the power to us, Christian early on talked about all the department heads meeting and trying to get our heads into, okay, now we're going to be into storm mode and we got to think about it. And you probably already included this as a part of that refreshment. But our police officers are on the road all the time. Our PW guys, they are on the road all the time, as well as code. And maybe that could be sort of a focus for them when they're walking around. Yeah, we're looking at the houses, and we're looking for public safety issue, and we're looking for speeders, and we're looking for stop sign runners. But also, just look up and take a look at those power lines. And if there's something that we can report as a village that would help FPL come out, because I also believe that the loudest voice gets the attention, then we can, bear pressure on them as a village. But also, we have a message to send out to the residents whenever this newsletter comes out, that they need to assess these things that are going to be surrounding their home, that'll impact them and their next door neighbors, and also make those calls, because all of those collective voices maybe will bring some resource to address the issue. I also believe that some change is going to come from all of this litigation that's now pending against FBL for their slow response in recovery. And so that should help along, but everywhere that we could put some pressure on them to improve, we should all do it. It's everybody's job.
And the other thing is the inventory piece. I think it's a very good idea for us to see what we can do to get an inventory of what are the most critical issues right now for some of our poles and infrastructure. And we have a public safety advisory board. Maybe that's something they can take on. I know Mr. Edmond has a lot of experience in these areas, so maybe you could spearhead that if possible, to talk about what are the major infrastructure issues associated with our power lines that are problematic now, whether they're leaning poles, whether they're really old poles. I know you have talked to me about a pole, because I asked him about a pole in front of my house that would look like the woodpeckers were having fun. So maybe you can at least bring that up. That would be very helpful. I know Mr. Ely as well is here, so I think that might be something to start with, because we do need to start looking at our infrastructure long-term and short-term and see what we can do to get FPL to update some of our more at-risk poles, for lack of a better word, and at-risk lines.
Well,
But did you want to comment?
I'm sorry to have to say this, but FPNL just does not upgrade their systems. Just disappointing as it is, go through Coconut Grove, they just don't do that kind of work. And right now, they are so far behind. We have 4 electrical services that need to be energized by the state or federal government we're waiting on 4 months now. And that's how far they are behind in their work. And they work well with us. I mean, they really work. They put us at the top. And they don't have the people, and they have the money, I believe. They just do not. It is typical. If they see this, it's just, people see it happening. What about my neighborhood? Miami has the oldest infrastructure going, I think, of any city. We have this electric out here is from the 40s, from the 1940s. And they'll come out there and tell you, well, it looks good to me, I mean, we'll send a lineman up there. He'll come down and go like, looks good to me, boss. And it's not that it's really bad, it's just the design is no good. They don't use single wire strand like that anymore. Any tugging on that, it just breaks.
But they replace it once it does break, correct?
Yeah, they'll replace it with the same thing. Now you see what they did on 8th Avenue. That's all triplex, concentric, everything. There's no single wire. Everything is spun wire. That's what needs to be done. There's really no way around it. I mean, it's kind of sad. It's the way it is. North Miami's terrible too. Take a look at Miami Gardens. It's just pathetic. The only thing you see new ever is, like 3-phase laterals, distribution laterals like we have on 8th Avenue. They harden those. But everything else is,
Thank
they
you.
just repair it. You know, there's nothing wrong with it. It's still safe. It is safe, but it's not worthy of our hurricane category 5 building code status. They don't have that kind of pressure on them to upgrade their systems. When we have to change our building codes, change everything about all the things we do, but they don't. Just the way it is.
Thank you for enlightening us, and,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, I'm not happy with that
Sad but
answer.
true.
And that's a frustrating thing about 8th Avenue. One of the things I asked the FPL was for some stats about what was the turnaround time to get power restored for, you know, the homes that are on the hardened infrastructure as opposed to the homes that are on the toothpicks out here that are all leaning. Still haven't.
It's always one
They-
day
yeah.
for that 8th Avenue.
Yep.
I just been very fortunate to be on there. It's never been more than one day. The next
26
morning-
hours,
Well,
right?
and that's what I noticed with, because
So that really
My mother-in-law
is
lives
the
over there.
park's power.
Yep.
You know, for the most part. I mean, that really is. So it's just the
well, I think,
infrastructure, you know,
Well,
it's not the power's back up the next day.
yeah, they're so, I mean, in my personal experience, they're very difficult to work with, to get information from. Doing an infrastructural risk assessment before a storm comes and identifying the poles and where there might be issues might be a way to, you have that catalog, and if there is an issue, because it seems like they're probably more responsive to litigation than they are from a request. So if you can show that these issues have been identified prior, and I think that's another value to doing an infrastructure risk assessment before a storm, to say, you know, listen, we've identified these issues, you know, boom, 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 you were put on notice.
Right.
Here's the email chain, here's the
I
communication
agree.
back and forth.
Identifying the problem
Yeah.
is worthy.
Well,
And
I'm gonna do one mayor thing here, and that is when we reached out to FPL, when we discussed things, things did get done. So I'd like to at least try the front avenue approach first and take where our most critical issues are, try and address it with FPL directly, see where we get, and see if they're responsive to upgrading some of our antique infrastructure.
But-
Everyone's absolutely right about doing an assessment of the infrastructure and
Right,
getting that to them, so.
I'm not sure how everybody else's house is.
I would still do that. I'm sorry. I would still do that because that is now in writing, and if we ever do have to sue them, we have something, we have more claims because they've already been put on notice. They are now affirmatively negligent. It gives us more teeth to any lawsuit if we do that assessment and have all of that in writing.
I mean, it's
They
unfortunate.
would have less defense. I apologize. They couldn't say, well, we didn't know, or something like that.
You know, it's kind of funny that we have to talk about litigation and holding, you know, FPL's feet to the fire at a discussion about hurricane preparedness. But in fact, that is part of it. That's that long-term, making sure that the village and the infrastructure is in place so that we can weather the storm. They may not do it for the next storm this year, but at least trying to get that in place. Which, you know, it's really unfortunate. That's kind of the situation that we're in, but that is the situation we're in. We have to be realistic about it, and then, you know, we're going to have to take, you know, my personal opinion, you know, do that assessment and take that approach.
Hold on, could you take the mic so we can?
I was just going to say Coral Gables did something similar to that and put them on notice, and it became a PR issue. And as soon as it became a PR issue, that's a real big problem for them.
Yeah, and that's one thing that, you know, companies, they don't want the bad PR does end up hurting them. And, you know, there are other, you know, utilities within the state of Florida, and they, of course, they want to try to be the shining beacon because they want to, you know, expand out further. So, yeah, it's going to be tough, but I think doing that risk assessment is going to be a strong part. And I think with hurricane preparedness, that's what, you know, I think is important that, you know, people here and people who end up viewing the tape at home or whatever need to understand that, you know, whether it's infrastructure or another hot topic we talked about earlier, communication, there's no one magic bullet that, you know, we're going to have to be extremely proactive. We're going to have to look at, you know, I'll go back to the communication real quick. We're going to have to look at multiple facets of communication. You know, working with our Crime Watch program, with the different sectioned off part of the villages in order to have a more cohesive approach to getting information out to residents. That's the boots on the ground, using a Nixle system, another way to get out information. I know we talked about researching AM stations, finding out about how to acquire a license for that. If there are a license to pick up, maybe using an agreement with some of our sister municipalities.
We have residents right now that are licensed as well.
No, I wasn't going to bring that up. But as far as an AM station license, extremely expensive. You're going to find that out. Number two, it's a license. You've got to keep renewing it. There's a lot involved, tower, communication equipment. It's a lot easier to make a deal with a small AM station that we're close to and say every 5 minutes after the hour, Biscayne Park is going to get an update. And the guy will come in there real small. So believe me, there's a bunch of teeny tiny AM stations in Dade County.
Yep.
And they could just say, okay, and for you Biscayne Park people, we have a couple of advisories here. That would probably be inexpensive, little contract.
It's funny. If you're on the Public Safety Advisory Board, I say, oh, wait a minute, you are. That's right. So there's, that's a good thing.
It's just a thought. And it
but
would
that's
be
a
like
good
buying
thing.
a little time.
Yeah.
And, okay, we got a hurricane, and they're doing that all the time.
Yeah.
People call in shows on hurricane, during and after. Oh, we have somebody here just reported that this is going. There's little to go on. They don't want to play music. They want to talk. They want to take calls. A smaller radio station with with local coverage here that we could easily get.
Yeah.
Might be.
Does Barry University have their own little AM station?
Probably do.
They do.
They probably do.
That may be something looking into too. They do, but
It's just a
but
thought.
once
A
again,
lot cheaper.
some of this is whether they're manned or not manned, and when they're manned and not manned. So we do have to look at that as well. I do want to. I mean, I know we're getting. I just want to make sure that everybody's had a chance to speak who wanted to speak. Is there anybody else who would like to speak or ask questions? Rosemarie, can you make sure we have a mic for her, please? Hold on.
I don't need a microphone.
Go ahead, Rosemarie.
You're sending out a newsletter?
We are.
When?
It will be coming out sometime in June. This is our first newsletter.
Good.
And so.
It will have all the necessary information for the residents so they'll know where to go, who to call, what to do, what not to do. Start trimming your trees now if necessary.
There will be a section of it addressing.
This will give them enough time to read it because a lot of our residents really don't bother reading or listening to anything.
Oh.
But if you get something in the mail, it's important, especially with hurricane season coming up. Maybe they'll read it this time.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I have a generator. I've had it 5 years after Wilma. I only paid $500 for it, but I have a lot of gas cans.
It's gas generator, yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily do air conditioning, which is where some of the folks want.
Refrigerator, the air conditioner,
Or
and
the one little air. You have like that wall unit.
no, it sits outside.
Oh, okay.
It's an outdoor. It's a brick strap.
No, I'm saying that you said you run your air conditioner. Small wall unit
Or through the house out to
for the small one. Okay.
They also did runs the chainsaws when we had our neighborhood from 11 to 10.
You had your team.
Did all the tree trimming and the debris removal. That's the crime watch for you.
Thank you, Mr. Ely. You're standing. Did you want to make any comments? No. Okay.
Other than if FPL is a problem, why don't we figure out a way in the future, thinking ahead of time, minimizing their influence by going solar or whatever, starting something like that, and slowly work them out of the system, go low voltage, redo the lines, whatever, send out the AC voltage, which we use, just start thinking future instead of using at FPL, that's gonna be the same thing.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thinking long, not just
Not this season. Not this. Right. Okay. Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
I know I lose power probably 2 or 3 times a year for an hour, occasionally once a year or so for 12 hours. When there's no storm, it's a Thursday, it's a Saturday, who knows why, and most of my neighbors do. And
It's
that's the reason we'd gotten a generator, because the power is constantly going off. Just recently, it starts to flicker. You get these little spot
spikes.
outages.
Well, spikes.
That usually means trees need to be trimmed. And it'll only take us a year and a half to get them to come out and trim them. But once they trim them, they'll say, oh no, that has nothing to do with it. But once they do it, the power stops flickering.
Is there anybody else? Anybody else would like to make a comment? First of all, I want to thank you all for taking your time on a Saturday and coming out here. Before I end, I just want to make sure there's no other comments from the commissioners or the manager. Okay, thank you all so much for coming out. We really do appreciate it. I know it's 2 hours of your time, but we thank you very, very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.